Everybody, welcome back to Scouting the League and welcome back to the Draft Room. Joined today by friend of the program, NFL scout Brian Zeches. You can find Brian over on X at bzeches7. Be nice in your comments today, as we are always respectful. Again, he has his opinions, I'll have my opinions, and you probably have your opinions. But again, let him know what you think. Head over there. Let me know as well. Give us both follows. I am Rodrik David at Right Step ADV is where you can find me. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, and following this podcast wherever you are listening and watching. Give our home and host over at Pro Football Insiders a follow as well. Check out those archives. Fantastic guests we have coming up, as well as those archives in the past as we get in. We're middle of the season. We got a bunch of fresh film, which means that 2026 draft gets maybe a little more clear each week. This wide receivers group has been a fun one because, again, a year where there's no dominant number 1 and 2. The number 1 wide receiver has to stay at Ohio State for another year. I think we probably agree. Again, Alabama has another one that's got to stay in school. But again, the 3 guys we're going to talk about today, really fun players, going to nice mix, which will create nice conversation pieces. But before we jump in with the wideouts, Brian, welcome back. How's everything been going on the scouting trail?
Oh, everything's great. Appreciate coming back here and be able to chat it up with you about good group of guys that we're going to talk about today, and fun watches in a couple different ways.
Yeah. Again, the wide receiver thing is fun because, again, they're more unicorn than I think we would like to act sometimes. Again, guys that can do everything, Z, X, and slot, like line up everywhere. Those guys are not dime a dozen. They are more rare guys that can do all that. Maybe one of them we talk about today has enough of that ability. Again, even a Marvin Harrison Jr. has some limitations when you line him up. Jeremiah Smith, maybe not. Julio Jones was a rare unicorn. You get some of those guys like, hey, this guy's rare. Jamar Chase may fit that category. But again, you start getting into your X, your Z, and your slot wide receivers when you start talking about these. Again, for those that don't know, Z, again, your better route runners, probably more speed. They're going to line up to the tight end, off the ball, move them around a little bit more. Those are going to be usually your top end wide receivers. Your X now, bigger body, probably a little less speed, probably a little less defined route runner, big body, contested catches. Again, those are the AJ Browns of the world that, hey, I'm just going to go up. Calvin Johnson, maybe the most dominant X we ever saw in the NFL. And then your slot wide receivers. Again, you get your big slots, your little slots, your guys that can move around, your underneath slots, a la Patriots all the years, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, your Mohamed Sanu, big slot type. So again, get a mix of those guys, and I think we have a couple of them today. And again, the way you value these guys is ultimately a representation of what that wide receiver room needs. So with all of that background, again, we mentioned Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, maybe the best wide receiver in the country. He's got to go back to Columbus for another year, but his teammate getting a lot of love for very good reason. Carnell Tate, 6'3", 195, going to be right in there. A true junior. All three of these guys underclassmen could have additional eligibility, but as we know, with these top round skill guys, usually they're coming out as underclassmen. Let's start with Carnell Tate. What do you think of him? He's been a starter, rotational guy. Is he ever the number 1? Again, we're seeing it with Emeka Egbuka, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. You cannot be a 1 at Ohio State and go on to be a really good pro. What do you think of Carnell Tate?
Yeah, no, I like watching this guy, and there's a lot of good things, about him. I would say, like, to me, there wasn't like one defining thing, as far as what he does, but he does like a lot of things really well at a really solid level. Like, this is a guy that I can see receiver coaches just loving because it's like, where he's going to be. He's a solid route runner. He's a solid catcher. He's can get open. He can do everything that the coaches ask of him and do it at a solid level. I think that's something that, not that he's necessarily the same guy and not trying to typecast because of Ohio State. It's like how when we were in Washington, we drafted Terry McLaurin for a lot of those reasons. It was like we started watching the guy and he was maybe a little bit lower down the draft board. And all of a sudden you start watching, it's like, well, what do we not like about this guy? And, you see, you go up, you talk about all the different things he can do. The receiver coach loves him. The offensive coordinator loves him. He's productive. He's been in a, obviously national championship school with, good guys around him. And I think that he's a guy that's going to play for a long time, and maybe, like you said, maybe not be like the one or whatever, but he's going to be a guy that's going to play a lot of football because he does, really everything pretty well at a, a good solid level. And, a lot of the battle at the NFL level is just being able to do the stuff to stay on the field and do the right things and stay around and have a long career. So, I think his production has been good. Obviously having, Jeremiah Smith, who sees a lot of it, get a lot of the balls where you're going to draw things up for him. But, you see him do it last year against, good competition against Michigan, against Texas, and then doing good things. Watched the game the other day against Illinois. He makes that catch on the sidelines where it's, tapping the toe and keeping it in and doing that. And it's just, you can't help but notice the guy for doing everything well, I guess is the best way to describe it. And so, it was a fun watch in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. Again, you think about the guy that came out last year of Ohio State and Mecca Boogan. There was the speed question for Mecca, and again, I think Carnell is going to run a little bit faster. But again, it's like that hey, yeah, what is maybe his very good trait? Well, again, his body control on the sidelines seems to be very good. But again, a really guy that across the board is going to be a good player. And you think about it at the NFL level, and again, he's kind of got already the situation. If he's a number two and the number one's getting all the extra coverage all the time, you feel really good about him getting 8, 10 targets. You're seeing it this year. And again, all of a sudden, you could make the argument that it's kind of what Igbuga's doing in Tampa. Like, all right, who do you want to cover this week, Godwin or Mike Evans? And hey, we got a really reliable too. And you absolutely, in today's day and age in the NFL, you basically need two, maybe even three number one type wide receivers, because it really limits that defense's ability to roll coverage and do things. And again, he's absolutely taken advantage of it at Ohio State with the other weapons they have. And again, they're going to end up with one or two other ones, down the process. Brian Hartline absolutely has it going. One of the things you love about him, again, and it'll show up on that character piece, is I would imagine there were probably at least a half dozen schools calling, Carnell Tate's family, being like, hey, you're going to be number two behind Jeremiah. Come here, get paid a really nice bag, and be our absolute, no question, number one. And yet, look at him. He's doing it at Ohio State, hopefully going to go back and win another championship there. So the production has been good. The consistency's been good. He's done it all the right way. Is this guy a slot, a Z, an X? Where do you think best utilized at the next level?
I think he's a Z to me. I can see a lot of the, the people that run like the kind of McVay, like Shanahan system will really like him. He kind of, it reminded me of Robert Woods a little bit too when I was watching him, just kind of like his play style of doing everything well and doing, just doing that. So, is he going to be doing the insert blocking and doing all that stuff? TBD with receivers. And, it takes a special guy to do that. But, I just kind of see a system like that being able to put him in some different spots and maybe have some reduced splits where he'll block now, he'll do that stuff where you can kind of move him around and maybe not necessarily have him as that true slot, but have him as that Z position that does a lot of everything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, draft comes next April 2026. Assuming this guy comes out, I think I would be surprised, because again, it's a wide receiver group where wide receiver one is probably still a question mark. Where does this guy ultimately end up going in the draft?
To me, he probably ends up maybe as high as the mid to low second, probably in that third. Like to me, I always kind of, I think he'll probably, for most teams, he'll probably start in that third-ish, fourth round, and then as you get going, you start. Maybe he goes to the combine and runs well. He's getting talk about the character spot. If he kills the interview, if the receiver coach likes him, there's always those guys that always move up that board in a good way, and it's almost like, why did we not have him here to begin with? Factor in the helmet he's wearing, with their success, that's we're all human. There's a lot of us in the scouting profession that bump guys up, give them a little bit of bump because of where they're at, and I think his ceiling is probably that mid to late second, probably more realistically in the third, and seeing the guy playing for a long time.
Yeah, man. I'm tough on this one because again, I think he's one of those guys that I think I'm probably grading him with the second round grade just because everything he does so consistently. You want him on your team, and yet I look at it, I'm like, I don't think this guy makes it out of the 20s. I think this guy ends up in that first round right at the end of it because of the way this draft is going to be. Again, all these quarterback questions. Again, there's if you want to say the high end unquestioned top five is a wide open thing right now, where usually it's like, hey, these three are going to be in the top five. It's just a matter of order. Man, that first round. So if you can get a starter like this, who's going to be a starter, man, I don't know if he gets out of the 20s.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Again, like everything else, like he could come out and just absolutely blow up the combine, or he could just have hopefully not have a bad day, and then that just that number's on the card, and it is what it is. So I think that's always with receivers to me. It's what that number shows on the card after March and April. It's just kind of like that factors a lot, like we all know.
Yeah. Well, Carnell can certainly call Jackson Smith and Jigba and Emeka Egbuka and say thanks for the boost because again, like you said, it's an automatic boost with the way Brian Hartline and Ryan Day have those guys going through that offense right now. Again, you're probably going to get the benefit of the doubt, and again, that maybe that means a couple spots in the draft. That's a good one. Let's transition down to a guy that's going to be a little bit more unique. Antonio Williams out of Clemson. You're looking at about a 5'11", probably a little bit under 6 foot, 190 pounds. You're talking a 10-game starter in 2022. Missed most of 23 due to injury. Redshirted that year, so again could have that year back. But then started every game in 24. Missed some time to start this year, but it has been very productive as Clemson's gotten it going. What are your thoughts on Antonio Williams?
No, I like this guy. I think this guy's got some juice. I think he's got some quickness. I think he's got some ability to separate. Playing out of the slot, he does a really good job on the option routes of reading leverage and finding space. And then when he does read that leverage and stick that foot, you see him burst out and do a lot of good things. He was a interesting guy to watch and fun guy to watch because I do a lot of different things with him in that offense too. It's you watch the North Carolina game, he's throwing the double pass on the first play for a touchdown, and then they come back and run a rocket sweep with him, and then they come and run an option route. And so, you like his versatility. Like you mentioned, he missed a few games to start the year, got hurt in that LSU game, and then came back and gets, I think, 7 catches against Syracuse, and then against North Carolina. It's like he never missed a beat. And then just going back and watching last year on some of the stuff too, had a bunch of catches against South Carolina at the end of the year. And, again, just his ability to work that inside and read leverage and then being able to have speed and separation. I think that was the fun part of it, to be able to, kind of watch him play in that regard.
Yeah, is this a true slot? When we start thinking, hey, you can line him up at X and Z and he'll be okay. He'll be sufficient. He can function out there, but you want this guy in the slot. Is that the way you view him?
I would say, yeah. I would say that's probably one of those ones where you have him as a slot, and then he probably has the skill set to do some stuff outside. That'd probably be like one of those ones, you have an injury or somebody you can maybe transition out that way. But I would, again, like with what he does, I would keep him in the slot and take advantage of his skill set that way, just from the option route running and all this stuff that people are doing now, that way.
What about from the backfield? Again, you talked about the burst and his ability to put his foot in the ground. Does this guy have Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick type qualities from the backfield? Is he going to be durable enough? Do you think just the running style as a returner as well? Does he have enough of that in him, or is like, hey, no, I want this guy at split out?
It's funny you mentioned both those guys, because when I was in Washington, we drafted Antonio and we signed JD. So it was kind of, I didn't necessarily think that, just because of knowing what, and Antonio was huge when he was coming out, and it's kind of one of those ones was like almost like too big for a receiver, and then JD was like just a little bit of everything. But I could see a little bit of that, a little bit of McKissick in his game, and just again from the options stuff of and now with everybody so good schematically and formationally, and motion guys back in there and getting guys in spots, and then your non-traditional just line him up there and static.
Mm-hmm.
I could see a lot of that happening. Again, getting them matched up on a linebacker is going to be a win for the offense, especially at the next level. So I could see some of that for sure.
I think down the stretch, it'll be interesting to see if Clemson gets him back returning punts because it's been a pretty big part of his game the last couple of years. Again, whether it's a health dictated thing, whether it's something, hey, a bigger part of the offense, it's just something that they want to hold off on with the way special teams is in the NFL. Again, kick returner, maybe we're seeing an uptick in importance back in it. Punt return, again, are you actually setting up returns? If you're valuing, if you're grading this guy, is this guy getting a bump up in his overall draft grade as a result of his returnability, or is it just a bonus? Hey, he's this level of receiver. Hey, by the way, he could be a starting returner for us as well.
Yeah, no, I would bump him up. We always there's places I was at where I always kind of gave the guy the sticker. Gave him that return tag, and as you're looking at it, especially like you said with the returns of kickoffs coming back now with that kickoff, which is to me has been great. You get to see guys do some more stuff and bring that play back. Now I think scouting can kind of transition a little bit more back to the way it used to be. Of you got Antonio or another guy you have in the same level, you're trying to make a decision. One guy has the return tag and another guy doesn't. I could see somebody saying, okay, let's take a chance on this guy. I'd rather go that route because of this. And, he does have return skill. And, again, that's a trait that some guys have and, some guys don't. And just the ones that have it can set them apart and play a little bit longer, Again, another lazy comparison, but a Clemson guy like Ray McLeod, who's down there in Atlanta, who's doing some good things for them, and had been a return guy and did a lot of good things. That's how guys extend their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a fun. It's going to be interesting as this Clemson team, we'll say, gets things right to go the rest of the way. Again, I think his production will match that. I certainly think they missed him early in the year as they dropped a couple of these ones because, again, the ball in his hands, he's a fun player. That initial quickness, his acceleration, once he's got that rock, is good to see. So, let's go to our last one. We're going to go clear out to the Northwest, Washington University, Denzel Boston. We're going about 6'4", 210. You're talking a true X wide receiver. What are your thoughts on Denzel? Redshirt in 22, started one game, played in 14 and 23, started all 13 and 24, starting in 25. What are your thoughts on Denzel?
Yeah, this is a guy in Washington. We talked about the X, Z, and slot. This guy's a true X to me, and excuse me, just watching him play, he does a really good job using his size. There's some bigger guys that don't necessarily do a good job with that. This guy does. I think he understands, the speed limitations that he has and understanding how to get open. That's always the bigger guys for me. You're not going to have that just natural separation, and you're going to have routes squatted on just because DBs are sitting there, they're flat foot and stuff more. So you have to be more creative. Whether it's using your size, using your hands, using your body, something to be able to create that space. And he does a good job of that. You see him run, the glance routes and skinny posts, and he does a nice job of setting it up and then being able to shield off that defender's path with that. I think he's got good enough speed. This is a guy we talked about the combine. He comes out and gets with goes down and trains with somebody and just absolutely blows up the combine. I can see this dude rising up pretty high just because you look at the size, the numbers on the card, whether it's the height, weight, speed, all that stuff. You can do that. And he's been productive too. That's another thing. It's, with the history of receivers that they've had the last few years, again, you look at the helmet, he's kind of the next one to come through there that's had production. And, I think as the quarterback develops out there too, who's a good player, he's doing a good job of finding them. And then when the game's on the line, they're playing Maryland a couple weeks ago and, the ball's coming his way. And, there's something to that, as we've all scouted guys, it's like, who are the receivers that are getting the ball thrown to him when it's a tight game at the end and the game's on the line, and he's in that role. So definitely like him. I would say at the next level, you probably have to have a speed guy opposite him just to be able to, take some of that off. When being in Kansas City, we had another big guy named with Dwayne Bowe, who we didn't Dwayne was a really good player, but we didn't have another speed guy opposite him. So it was just coverage was just sitting there where, you look at, like Atlanta now, they have Drake, who's an excellent, Pro Bowl level guy on side. Doesn't have quite the speed, but they got Mooney on the opposite side to kind of, fill that role as well. So I think if you get him in a role with a speed guy opposite, he's really going to flourish at the next level.
Yeah. Where for these last two guys? So you get outside of that kind of do it all Carnell Tate to an Antonio Williams and it's Denzel Boston. Where do you see again Denzel? Like you said, trains well, runs sub 4.5 would probably be the number everybody would love to see him at. Move him up. Antonio Williams again is that smaller slot. You want to see a high number. Where do you think these guys end up in the draft?
Well, I guess for me, it's all I always think of the guys, just the old color scale of like the red, the blues, the reds. We had that, your win with starter. You're good enough, like that to me is Denzel. He's that kind of that gold grade, that win with starter. Typically in that third, fourth round. I always thought again, don't necessarily think of him as a red player, but he goes out and runs well. He all of a
Yep,
sudden people always think of him as
becomes
that
your
you
red
move him up in
player.
that second round. So again, I think it's a little bit, I guess maybe it's a lazy answer to say it depends on how they run, but I think I could see him being if he runs really well. I could see him like people looking at him at the bottom of the first. I could see a second round grade. I think for me, I would be at this point probably more comfortable saying like a third round guy at this point. I think Antonio probably is in that second round just because of the he's going to run well. He's got quickness. He's got the return stuff. He's he's going to have some showcase games here down the stretch. Like Clemson. I think that's again. I think it all. A lot of it depends on what teams value at the receiver position as well. I think that's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
factor of it, and who that receiver coach is and what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah, what the rest of that room looks like, which again you start factoring a lot of things. Again, where's the team drafting, where's the board falling, all those kinds of things. Again, with Denzel Boston, you think about a Keon Coleman getting drafted with that first pick of the second round. Again, that's start to where again you run that sub 4.5 for Denzel. You're probably thinking about him right in that ballpark. Again, I completely agree. This is a win with guy. Again, if he's lined up for 40-45 snaps on offense at X, you feel good about it. And it's always one of those questions I ask with my wide receivers. If is this guy a number two that could be a number one for a couple weeks, or is this a number two where if thrust into that role, it's going to be ugly? And again, not sure where I'm completely at on Denzel on that one because again, I'm more, hey, he's a two. We need to keep him at two, which means the right room, the right offense is going to be important for him. Carnell, it's probably why I'm a little higher. Is I think he could be that one for a couple weeks, and then Antonio, I think he again fits a different category where hey, you have the right offensive coordinator again, a Sean Payton, a Sean McVay, somebody Kyle, of course, who I think we both think highly. Again, guys who are really good offensive minds, maybe Matt LaFleur, even though he's kind of loaded at wide receiver right now, guys that know how to use these players and we'll have some fun with them. So we got wide receiver set for this round. Again, it's going to be fun to see where these guys go. Again, for Clemson, getting back to where Clemson should be. For Washington, continue to compete in the Big Ten, and for Ohio State, again, keep on marching toward that national championship and maybe beat Michigan this year. If there's probably something that Carnell Tate wants to do before he leaves Ohio State, it's beat Michigan, and they got a few tests before then, but we know they have that one circled up in Columbus. So Brian, always fantastic to have you on. Love the insight. At B Zeches 7 is where you can find him. Check the show notes for that. We will certainly have you back at some point. Again, if you want to ask Brian specific questions, you want a specific position, let us know, let him know, let me know. I am at Right Step ADV. We will keep watching film, and at the end of the day, we will keep scouting.